Hello everyone, Bag here, and welcome to my complete Hysilens guide. Here we'll take a look at her teams, her builds, her playstyles, and her premium options, so that you can leave this video as a more informed player and puller than when you got here. Timestamps are below if you don't need a kit summary, and with that, let's get into things. Hysilens is a 5-star physical Nihilda unit, who is our next entry into the dot archetype. She is a main DPS that works off of frequent dot proccing, so let's get into her kit. Her basic attack does nothing special, while her skill is a very simple AoE hit with a vulnerability debuff. The most relevant thing about her skill besides the very important debuff is just that it gives 30 energy, as her ultimate is very important. That ultimate, on top of being an AoE hit, also summons a 3-turn field, where the enemy's attack and defense both get lowered. While enemies are in this field, whenever they take dot damage, Hysilens deals a coordinated physical dot hit per dot, with up to 8 coordinated hits per turn or action. This is her primary form of damage, meaning that the more dots that are on the enemy, the more damage she'll deal. The fact that she needs the enemy to take dot damage also lines her up extremely well to work with Kafka, since Kafka's whole thing is proccing dots very frequently. Getting up to 8 different dots on the enemy seems entirely impossible, but her talent helps jumpstart this count. Whenever her or any ally attack an enemy, they apply a random dot, either wind shear, burn, shock, or bleed. These dots are rather weak, but they just more so act as a catalyst for her ult to have more dots to work off of. Getting into her traces, her minor traces give a boatload of speed, some attack, and some effective rate. Literally the only 3 stats that she really wants, so this is very nice. And with her base speed, she ends up being pretty fast without speed boots, which is important to consider with gearing. Hysilens' first trace creates her zone at the start of combat, and also, whenever her zone is created, she generates 1 skill point. Skill points can be rather scarce in some dot teams, so alleviating that partially with this trace actually goes a long way. This also means that she gains 1 SP from the zone being created from this trace, so her team basically just naturally starts with 4 SP at the start of combat. Her second trace gives her ultimate's AoE hit, a dot proc on all enemies. This dot proc has a higher ratio than Kafka's, so while it's not nearly enough to make her self-sufficient in dot proccing, it's still a nice occasional very big hit. Her third trace gives her a stacking 15 damage percent buff for every 10 effective rate over 60, maxing out at 90 damage percent when at 120 effective rate. Her skill debuff and dots do have effective rate requirements, but this trace makes it so that you'll blow past her minimum debuff application requirement just for the free damage percent. The real minimum effective rate for her is 75% to activate Kafka's attack buff, and while you don't need to exactly get to 120 effective rate for her to function, it is a worthwhile stat to min-max as much as you can. Finally, her technique starts combat with 2 of her talent dots on all enemies. This is a special dimension effect technique, meaning that it clashes with Robin and Ratio's techniques, for some reason. I'd say it's worth using over Robin's most of the time, although with how thresholds based Robin's energy can be, it ultimately just depends on how much energy the fight gives her. For trace leveling, you really want to max her ultimate and skill for her damage and debuff scaling. Her talent does increase damage as well, but it's rather secondary as its dots are just not that strong. And lastly, you will be basicking with Hysilens, but you don't need to level it that high, as its damage will never be that impactful. Alright, so when playing Hysilens, the complications that you need to deal with are less so with her, and more so just with her team comp as a whole. Hysilens herself does most of her damage outside of her turn, as Kafka's and the enemy's turns are when most dots are procced. One of the only real active decisions to make with Hysilens, then, is when to skill with her. Without an ER rope, you can literally skill every turn, and you still wouldn't be able to get to her 110 energy cost. And with an ER rope, you'd need to skill every turn to just barely make it. This is a rather unrealistic scenario, however, as any energy source alleviates this problem tremendously. Getting hit, getting quid pro quo procs, a ho-ho ult, or maybe most importantly, getting kill credit with her damage, can all easily bridge that gap for her. Additionally, since you start combat with the full 3-turn field, and you also start with half energy, this energy rotation is only relevant for the second ult and onwards, which might not even be that relevant depending on how fast you clear and how many turns Hysilens takes. You do want to be skilling just to keep her debuff uptime up, but that shouldn't be that much of a struggle outside of pure fiction, since skilling about every 3 enemy turns is very achievable. Like with many other characters' fields, you are also entirely fine to use Hysilens' ult early before its 3-turn duration is up, since the more ults you get off in the fight, the more big AoE dot procs she can get out, alongside the free SP. So generally, you want to basic with Hysilens as much as you can get away with, in order to better activate the other half of her game plan, whose name is Kafka. I will say flat out right here, if you do not have Kafka, Hysilens is just not that worth using as a main DPS in endgame content. So for the purpose of this guide, we will assume you have her. Don't get mad at me for this, get mad at Hoyoverse. Kafka wants to skill literally every turn, as not only is her skill a very large source of damage with its dot procs on the primary and adjacent enemies, but it also also generates more energy. Kafka's ult rotation is pretty important for this comp, as it's a self-feeding loop. More ults means more follow-ups and more turns through Eagle, which then means more ults. So keeping that momentum going is extremely important. This means an ER rope, an ER planer like Lushaka, and tutorial. Hysilens' damage matters way more than Kafka's, so dumping Kafka's damage to better support her is entirely worth it. Kafka can get about 100 energy per turn, getting her pretty close to a one-turn ult with good enough hit RNG. Dot's largest weakness is its reliance on the enemy's turn to access its big damage, so Kafka being proactive with her proccing is a great way to shave off multiple cycles. With one unit skilling every turn, and one unit skilling semi-regularly, the other two units want to be generally SP positive. We'll get more into this with the team section, but generally, you should weigh the third team slot and sustain to make the team comfortable and feasible to play well. Units like Huohuo may have indispensable utility, but Gallagher might still be better in just letting a team comp function in the first place. Other than that, there are some more obvious tips. Since Hysilens' damage scales directly off of how many dots are on the enemy, it makes sense to first apply dots with AoE attacks, like say a Gallagher ultimate or a Chibi follow-up, before popping Hysilens or Kafka's ults. Those AoE attacks should be used mindfully with Kafka's follow-up attacks, as they make her follow-up attack hit a random enemy, which can leave the chances of it actually hitting the important dotted up enemy rather slim. So waiting for Kafka's follow-up charges to deplete first is a good idea. With how fast Kafka gets her ult, it's also entirely possible to overcap with follow-up charges. She can hold a max of 2, and gets 1 per turn and 1 per ultimate. So back-to-back ultimates from APOC or Pure Fiction buffs, or just consecutive turns without allies attacking, can lead to massive losses in damage and energy for her. This is pretty easy to manage by just having someone's attack ready to consume a follow-up attack when needed, but it is still something to actively keep in mind. Crunching the numbers for stacking dots, Kafka's shock from her follow-up and ultimate, combined with Hysilens' talent, gets you 5 out of 8. You get an extra dot for breaking an enemy with a lightning, physical, wind, or fire unit, and you can also get 1 dot from dot turbulence buffs when they show up. So that last 1 or 2 have to come from other teammates or other effects such as trend. But yeah, Hysilens' dot teams are rather simple to play at a baseline. A lot of her specific intricacies revolve around her other teammates, such as Black Swan also wanting to skill for debuff uptime and energy, which can make SP even more tight. Ron Mei breaking the enemies faster might mean pushing an enemy's turn out of a cycle, which means that they wouldn't take their dot damage within said cycle. And Robin's action advance, which can be tricky to min-max with the disparity between Kafka and Hysilens' speed, where either you waste an action advance on Hysilens or you lose a bit of action advance on Kafka. So long as you're skilling with Kafka every turn, you juggle SP correctly by not skilling more than you need to on every other unit, and you maintain ult uptime on Hysilens, then overall you should perform just fine. A plug here to subscribe. I'm really excited to cover the 3.6 units, which, well, they aren't gem marketed as I'm writing this, but if you know then you know. If you want to see that pre-release coverage from me, then stick around. Alright, back to the vid. Gearing Hysilens is pretty simple, as she has multiple tailor-made sets. For main sets, boom, prisoner set. Death Shred is really nice to stack with her, thanks to her own Death Shred and a lot of her common teammates, so it's a no-brainer. For planar, boom, Revelry is the new designated dot set. It's pretty easy for her to reach the attack requirement, so it's another no-brainer. You can go Glamoth at 135 speed, or I guess Pan-Cosmic for the effect hit rate and sizable attack, but that requires farming Pan-Cosmic, so look, just put the Revelry in the bag. For substats, things are a bit complicated. For body, EHR and attack give the same amount of stats, so your choice is dependent on how much EHR is in your relics overall. If an EHR body gets you closer to 120% EHR, then it's better, but if it's instead overkill, and you can get to 120 without it, then attack percent is better. EHR is a lot easier to use, since it's really hard to get to 120 without it, so it's the easier one to recommend. For boots, we want attack percent. Like I said in the playstyle section, most of her damage happens outside of her own turn, so building speed on her doesn't really make too much sense. For orb, damage percent is still better than attack. Even with her talent dots doing other element damage, her physical damage is still by and large the majority of her damage. Lastly, for rope, you again want to go attack rope, and in most realistic scenarios, she should be fine enough energy-wise through getting kills and getting hit to where an ER rope is overkill. Think of her as a carry in terms of damage importance, in where dropping an attack rope hurts a lot, and I don't think she's quite Aglaya levels of energy starved to necessitate actually making the switch. For substat goals, get as close as you can to 120% 20% EHR. But again, don't stress about entirely maxing it out. To quote Jay Stern, getting to 120 is not the minimum, it's the maximum. For speed, her signature gives some team-wide speed, but only after hitting the enemy. So you'll still need about 129 speed to get 2 turns in the first cycle. Without her signature, the standard 133.4 is the goal, which is achievable with attack boots thanks to her very high base speed and the small amount of substats that actually matter for her to go for, which makes speed easier to slot in and focus on with her relics. And then lastly, just get as high attack as you can. 3600 is the target for the Revelry set bonus, but there is no upper limit here. For light cones, things are pretty interesting. First off, her free-to-play option is going to be Eyes of the Prey, for its 40% effective rate and 48% dot damage. This is actually a very solid 4-star option, even if her signature is still really good in its own right. Her signature, on top of having a higher base attack, also has 40% EHR, and trades at 48% dot damage for a stacking dot vulnerability debuff that goes up to 30%. The light cone also has a 10% team-wide speed buff, where every teammate needs to hit the debuffed enemy to get the speed. This 30% dot vulnerability is mostly impactful in making triple dot a lot stronger, as her and Black Swan can benefit from this buff. In fact, if you really want to min-max, you can give Hysilens' light cone to Black Swan, if you want to then give a stronger personal damage light cone to Hysilens, such as, well, ironically, Black Swan's signature. I should also mention that Jiaoxiu's signature is good to hold for either her or Black Swan, with its high effective rate and vulnerability that needs a dot for its full effect. I think Hysilens is a unit who feels very complete at E0S0, but her light cone is also very good on top of that. The only thing that makes me not entirely recommend it 100% is just that Eyes of the Prey is just really good, and the awkward speed uptime at the start of the fight makes it only really drop her speed requirements by a couple of substats. Go for it if you like her, and if you want to make triple dot more of a standout best team for her, instead of it mostly just being a side grade-ish to double dot. I do want to lastly mention Kafka's signature, as it gives another dot for her to use. This can be worn by either her or Black Swan, but it is still worse than tutorial for Kafka herself. You can also always use solitary healing for pure fiction, although both of these options don't have any EHR, so building optimally might be a bit of a headache. For her teams, I already have a teammate tier list, so watch that if you want a deeper dive. But for a TLDR, things are both simple and complicated. For the simple part, Kafka is basically required for Hysilens to perform at a high level. No other unit in the game can even slightly replicate her dot proccing ability. So if you don't have either Hysilens or Kafka and you want to pull Hysilens, I would honestly recommend waiting for a rerun if you can't get both of them at the same time. The third team slot is a lot more contentious. On one hand, we have triple dot, which is basically heralded by Black Swan. This team can be kind of slightly marginally best in slot, assuming the enemy is physical and win weak, and assuming that you can play around the fact that Black Swan also wants to skill on a consistent basis for her skill debuff, short uptime ult debuff, energy, and efficient arcana stacking. If you can make it work though, then yeah, it's a great core. And again, premium options that buff the whole team's damage really help here, since Black Swan's personal damage is a large portion of her overall utility. Otherwise, Harmony and Nihility options can be essentially side grades or small upgrades in situations where Black Swan can't do too well. Robin excels when the fight has enough energy for her to consistently ult, since otherwise, this team can't really help her much in jumpstarting her ult looping. Ranmei is great for breaking faster for that dot break, her speed buff is pretty nice for speed breakpoint hitting, and either DDD or her signature are great for more action advancing or SP help respectively. Cypher can also stand out if a given fight's damage portfolio calls for her ult to be used in order to shave off a cycle. But in any case, her generalized utility is consistently great. Tribi has DDD and consistent AoE attacks for fast talent proccing, and it should go without saying that she more so excels in high enemy count fights. And Jiaoxiu is notable for having a dot to contribute, but his lesser damage amping still puts him ever so slightly behind the above options. Still, everyone here is relatively even with each other, so for 99% of accounts, whoever has a signature or an Eidolon or whoever the specific fight favors will do the best here. You can also use RMC, Silverwolf, Pela, or the 4-star dot trio, and while each of them can work, they are just lesser than the raw amp from the above options. Lastly, for sustain, it's a balancing act between genuine utility and SP generation. If you have a third team slot like Cypher who never skills, then Huohuo is easy to slot in, but in triple dot teams, Gallagher or Hyacin might be needed instead. I would personally just recommend to feel it out once you have your hands on this team to see how comfortable you are with a given comp's SP usage, but Gallagher and Hyacin are always the safest, most comfy options to fall back on. You can also run any other sustain, especially a preservation character who can apply a 2-turn burn with Trend, but while this is a very strong utility, it doesn't quite beat out the other very impactful roles that the other top dogs fill. Lastly, we have her Eidolons, which are overall pretty good. Her E1 makes all dots do a flat extra 16% more damage, and also her talent dots are now duplicated, meaning that she is able to reach 8 dots on the enemy entirely by herself. This is a massive damage increase in duo dot teams, as a maximum of 3 extra dots to proc off of, compared to E0, is a massive difference. Think of it like every 2 Kafka dot procs, you get a baseline of 10 dot hits at E0 and 16 at E1. That 16 is slightly more than the 15 that you would get from 3 Kafka procs at E0. This is also great for triple dot for increasing Black Swan's damage, but the utility with the extra dots is diminished since Black Swan's Arcana already does some of the heavy lifting that this Eidolon is trying to accomplish. I think Hysilens has a classic case where her E1 is better than her S1, but her S1 is cheaper. So if you want to vertically invest into her, just keep in mind that they are both good options, and that she is also entirely competitive without either of them. Her E2 gives her damage boost from her third trace to all allies. This doesn't mean everyone needs EHR, it just means that her own damage bonus from this trace is then given out to everyone. This is more meh. It doesn't boost Hysilens' damage at all, and in every Hysilens team, she is the one dealing the majority of the team's damage. So it's generally more worthwhile to upgrade her damage, rather than trying to bring up the rest of the team to be more alongside her. It's decent for a triple dot, but not spectacular. Her E4 is a very simple 20 res pen shred in her alt field. You all know enough about Robin's E1 to know that this effect is very powerful, even if Hysilens' E4 is lower by 4%. It's not exactly worth going for, of course, but for the usual low standards of an E4, it's actually on the higher end of usefulness, which is nice, I guess. Finally, her E6 gives another flat 20% damage increase, while increasing her dots trigger max count to 12. Thanks to her first Eidolon, she gets 8 from herself and 1 from Kafka. So we're back to square one, where this new cap is a bit hard to max out. As such, I think this E6 is just kind of good, but not amazing. It's nice that all of her Eidolons, save for E2, give her very simple flat increases in her damage. But for me, E6s are held to an incredibly high standard that Hysilens doesn't exactly reach. And that's everything. Going to the membership corner, we have Zinnia as our next new member. Thank you again to all of my new channel members that have joined in the first month. You are all the absolute goats. And if you want to support me and this channel, then join them for a few bucks a month. Alright, enough shilling. With that, I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Bye!